In a quiet suburban classroom, 12-year-old Ethan Miller, shy, quiet, and wearing shoes with holes, turns in his crumpled homework. Laughter erupts when Ms. Caroline Hart, the school's strictest teacher, mocks his dirty paper and broken pencil in front of everyone. Humiliated and heartbroken, Ethan endures the cruel whispers without a word. Yet behind his lowered eyes, a quiet strength flickers, and a secret none of them could ever imagine. The morning sun spilled through the tall classroom windows, painting golden stripes across the rows of desks. The bell had just rung, and 26 students shuffled in, laughing, chattering, and tossing books onto desks. Among them was Ethan Miller, a boy who tried to make himself smaller with every step he took. His shoes were torn at the edges, his jeans faded and a size too big, and the sleeves of his sweater clung to his thin wrists like they didn't belong to him. He clutched a sheet of paper in his hand, wrinkled, smudged, but filled with his best effort. He had spent hours writing it by candlelight the night before while his mother scrubbed office floors on the late shift. To him, it wasn't just homework, it was proof that he was trying. "Homework on my desk, everyone," came the crisp, cold voice of Miss Caroline Hart. She stood at the front like a statue, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. She had a reputation in Westbrook Middle School. Brilliant but brutal, feared more than respected. Ethan walked slowly to the front, heart pounding. As he laid his paper on her desk, a smudge of dirt from his fingers streaked the corner. Miss Hart lifted the sheet with 2 fingers as if it were diseased. "What is this?" she said loudly, her voice slicing through the morning chatter. "Is this supposed to be homework, Mr. Miller? Or did you pull it out of the trash?" Snickers rippled through the room. Ethan stared at the floor. "Look at this handwriting. These stains. And this." She held up his broken pencil stub for all to see. "This is what you used? Did you forget how to use a proper pencil?" Laughter exploded now, sharp and merciless. "Maybe he dug it out of a dumpster," someone whispered. "Doesn't even look like paper," another muttered. Ethan's face burned. His throat ached with words he would never say. He wanted to tell them how hard he'd tried, how his mother skipped dinner so he could eat, how this paper, though dirty, held every ounce of his heart. But he said nothing. He just nodded, took his seat and stared out the window. "Sit down," Ms. Hart snapped. "Maybe next time you'll bring something worth reading." The bell rang, but the echo of their laughter clung to him like a stain. He pressed his hands together under the desk, his knuckles white. And though his eyes stayed low, a spark flickered there, a silent promise to himself. They thought they knew who Ethan Miller was, but they had no idea, and the day they found out would change everything. Each morning felt heavier than the last. Ethan's footsteps grew slower, his backpack felt heavier, and the walls of Westbrook Middle seemed taller and colder. Ms. Hart had made him her favorite target. "Class," she announced one afternoon, "your next assignment is a 3-page essay printed and bound. No handwritten work accepted." A murmur spread through the room. Everyone knew Ethan didn't own a printer. He barely had pencils. "Problem, Mr. Miller?" Ms. Hart asked, her lips curving into a thin smile as she locked eyes with him. "No, ma'am," he whispered, even though panic thudded in his chest. He tried. He always tried. He scribbled the essay by hand, line after line, pouring every ounce of effort into it. But when he handed it in, Ms. Hart held it up like trash. "Did I not say printed?" she said loudly, pacing in front of the class. "Can't even follow basic instructions." Laughter again. Cruel, echoing laughter that dug under his skin. At home, the air was different. Tired, but warm. His mother, Lena Miller, came home as dawn broke, smelling of bleach and soap. Her hands were red and raw from scrubbing office floors. She smiled for Ethan. Always smiled, even when her body trembled with exhaustion. "Don't listen to them, baby," she whispered one night as they sat by a flickering candle. "You're meant for more than they can see." But the world outside didn't listen. It only grew harsher. On a gray afternoon, rain pounded the cracked sidewalks as Ethan walked home. His shoes had split open days ago, so he carried them in his hands to save what was left. Barefoot and soaked, he trudged through puddles, hugging his books close to his chest to keep them dry. Behind the tinted glass of a sleek black car parked at the corner, a man watched him quietly. Richard Miller, his jaw sharp, his eyes piercing, followed every slow step Ethan took. His knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, a storm brewing in his gaze. "Sir," the driver murmured. "Shall I call him over?" "Not yet," Richard said softly. "Not yet." He watched his son disappear around the corner, his heart heavy with the truth he'd kept hidden for too long. Ethan was learning lessons no child should have to learn. About cruelty, about shame, about dignity in the face of humiliation. But those lessons were almost over. Soon, the world that had mocked his son would learn something too. And when that day came, nothing in that classroom would ever be the same again. And it would begin with a single visit that would leave them speechless. The morning began like no other. The usually noisy halls of Westbrook Middle were hushed. The students lined up straighter than usual, and the staff moved with nervous precision. A visitor was coming. The new chairman of the city's education board, a man whose donations had built libraries, funded scholarships, and transformed schools across the district. Ms. Caroline Hart had been awake since dawn. She wore her finest navy blazer, her hair perfectly pinned. This, she believed, was her moment. The chance to impress the man who could elevate her career beyond the classroom. "Remember your manners," she hissed at her students, casting a cold glance toward Ethan. "Especially you." Ethan didn't respond. He sat at his desk, quiet and still, his torn shoes tucked beneath the chair, his eyes fixed on the page of a tattered library book. The whispers around him had never stopped. The jokes, the stares, the cruelty. But today, something about him felt different, like a tide about to turn. At precisely 10 a.m., the sound of polished shoes echoed down the hallway. Conversations died mid-sentence. The classroom door opened, and in stepped a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding silence. "Welcome, Chairman," Ms. Hart said breathlessly, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "I'm Ms. Caroline Hart. It's such an honor to have you visit our school." But the man didn't take her hand. He looked past her, scanning the room until his eyes found Ethan, and then, to the shock of every student and teacher present, Richard Miller, a name whispered with reverence across the city, walked right past Ms. Hart and knelt beside the boy she had humiliated. "Ethan," he said softly, his voice breaking into a smile, "I've missed you, son." The room fell silent. A paper dropped, a chair creaked, and then came the sharp intake of Ms. Hart's breath as the words sank in. "Son?" she repeated, her voice trembling. Richard rose, his arm around Ethan's shoulders. "Yes, my son. I wanted him to understand humility. I wanted him to see the world without privilege, to learn what kindness and respect look like when no one knows your name." His gaze hardened, and what he found here was cruelty. Color drained from Miss Hart's face. The classroom she ruled like a queen now felt like a courtroom, and she stood accused. "I trusted this school," Richard continued, his voice steady. "But instead of teaching him, you tried to break him." No one dared breathe. Ethan looked up, his quiet dignity shining brighter than ever. And for the first time, Ms. Hart couldn't meet his eyes. The world she built on fear had begun to crumble, and it was only the beginning. What came next would decide whether that world would fall or transform forever. The day after Richard Miller's revelation, Westbrook Middle felt like a different place. Whispers followed Miss Hart down every hallway. Once feared, she now moved like a shadow, her confidence shattered by the weight of her own actions. The summons came quickly. Inside the boardroom, Richard sat across from her, his expression calm but resolute. "You humiliated my son," he said quietly, "and not just him. Every child who's ever felt small in your classroom." Ms. Hart's hands trembled. I was wrong," she whispered. "I thought I was preparing them for the real world." "You weren't," Richard replied. "You were breaking them before they even had a chance." Silence stretched before he continued. "I could have you removed today, but Ethan doesn't want that. He believes people can change. So here's my offer. Teach him. Really teach him. Treat him with respect. Learn from him. Or walk away from this job." Tears burned at the corners of Ms. Hart's eyes. "I'll stay," she whispered. "I want to make this right." The weeks that followed were awkward. Ethan avoided her gaze, answering her questions with quiet nods. Ms. Hart stumbled over her words, unsure how to bridge the chasm she had created. Yet slowly, something began to shift. One afternoon, she lingered by his desk as he wrote. "That's a strong opening line," she murmured, surprised by her own tone. Gentle, not sharp. Ethan glanced up, cautious but curious. The next week, she asked him to share his essay aloud. His voice shook at first, but as he read, the room fell silent. His words painted stories of injustice and hope, of pain turned into purpose. When he finished, even the students who once mocked him stared in awe. "Brilliant work," Ms. Hart said softly, and this time she meant it. As months passed, she saw him bloom, his confidence rising like sunlight after a long winter, and she too changed. The bitterness that once hardened her heart softened into humility. She began staying after class, helping him refine his writing, pushing him not with cruelty but with care. Spring arrived with unexpected news. Ethan's essay had won first place in a national competition. The boy once mocked for dirty paper and broken pencils now stood on a stage beneath golden lights, a medal gleaming around his neck. In the front row, Ms. Hart rose to her feet, clapping until her palms ached. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Not just for Ethan's victory, but for her own redemption. Because in teaching him with dignity, she had relearned what it meant to be a teacher. And in forgiving her, Ethan had given her something even greater than forgiveness. He had given her a second chance, and for both of them, this was only the beginning.